Hi everyone, welcome to the day 3 lecture, which we're doing asynchronously this week. A couple of notes before I get started. One is I have done this a couple of times now and have run into several technical issues, mostly around audio stuff, failing on me catastrophically. So hopefully this one works, and bear with me if I mess up here or there a little bit just because I'm checking on things as I go. But the other thing I wanted to note is that this lecture is kind of modified and adapted from the version I usually give in person, and will be missing some slides here and there. I tried to make it so it's smooth and as seamless as possible for this new format, but if there's some weird slides in here or some less than elegant transitions as I go through, bear in mind that this wasn't exactly written and built for this style of format of presentation, and also of not having you all in class to stop for questions or to do a couple of the demos that we're going to move to our in-person and Zoom sessions next week. So anyway, let's get started. We're going to be talking a little bit more about user experience design. We've already touched on what user experience is a little bit this week, and we have talked a little bit about some of the tools that we'll use. But we're going to start really digging into designing the interface elements at a very high level space with some of the tools that we're talking about today. So we're going to actually start thinking about what the user experience is of the apps that we are building. And so that's the point of today. That's going to look a little bit like this. We're not actually going to do a reading discussion right now. Instead, I kind of want to save some of that for in-person and Zoom meetings, the small group sessions next week. Real quick Figma exercise. We'll go a little deeper into what UX design is and do a little bit more of a deep dive there. Talk about content mapping and user flows, and then wrap up with just a little bit more stuff about Project One. Keep going on that. So first thing I want us to do is very quickly, you don't have to do this necessarily in real time, but you might as well just try it out so that you can make sure you're doing it right. But quick 1-minute exercise. Every time you make a new screen for an app, the first thing that you should always do is create a frame. You should never just be designing right on the stage in Figma. Instead, you should be creating a frame, putting all of your content in that. The other thing I want to point out right here is it says create a phone frame. If you are going to be designing for mobile, I would highly suggest that you drag one of the phone frames in from the sidebar, and I'll show you this in a second, instead of just drawing a random kind of mobile shaped box on your screen. There's a couple reasons for that, but I'll get into that in a second when we get to the demo. The other things that people maybe forget when they're creating stuff for mobile is that scrolling exists. And quite often when you are designing for your spaces, first-time designers will often try to fit everything all into one 3-inch screen space. But you actually can and should make use of as much space as you need for all the content to fit comfortably in the screen. And so it's a good idea to, in the very beginning of a project, very first screen, go ahead and just make it taller. Drag the frame so it's nice and tall, and then step 4, go even more than you think you're going to need. It's easy to collapse a frame back in, but it's harder to kind of force yourself to use up as much space as you need to do it when you see that box sitting on your screen. So let me just show you what I mean by all this. So open up a new Figma file. We're going to use the frame tool, this button up here in the top left. And instead of just drawing a mobile shaped frame like this is just an arbitrary rectangle, that is not going to help us as much as if we were to use the frame and maybe pick one of the phone templates that are over here. They've got lots of different scales and sizes. They even have things for social media posts. But if you go to phone, you can see there's a handful of common iPhones and Google phones. I personally have an iPhone X style thing, so I'm going to just click that, and you can see it creates a screen that is exactly the right dimensions, which is pretty weird dimensions. It's 375 pixels wide by 812 pixels tall. Hard to remember that off the top of your head, but there you go. Already we have exactly the right screen size. One other cool thing that happens when we pick one of those phone templates as opposed to just drawing one on our own is that when we prototype this, when we test this out in the prototyping mode, we actually get more of a phone screen format. It doesn't just try to turn this into a generic, tall, skinny screen that doesn't have the right framing and context. This actually gets interpreted as a phone when you use those sizes. And then steps 3 and 4, I want you to make your screen taller. Even though we might only see the section that we have here at the top, Figma has the ability to have scrolling within its prototyping. So if you need more room, go ahead and make use of it. I would highly suggest getting that going into a habit right away as opposed to forcing yourself to work in a small space and then expanding as you need it. Sometimes having more space than necessary encourages you to do the right thing and add a lot of white space in your interface. But if you kind of start collapsed, it's really hard not to try to fit into the space that you're given. If you don't need all this space after you've filled it in with your content, you can always shrink it back up again to be the appropriate height. But until then, give yourself more space than you need. All right, back to the lecture. Let's talk about user experience. So, why do you think user experience is important? Obviously, this would be a question we have a little discussion about in class, but I'll just tell you some of the stuff as we go through the next couple steps, and hopefully these tools will help clarify what we're looking for and why we're thinking about this stuff at all. Well, one big thing that I want to say, and I'll probably say over and over again over the whole term, is that a lot of the UX tools that we're using help us decide early so that we can focus on the design stuff later. Instead of trying to figure out what content we want on our page and what color our buttons and how big our buttons should be and what typeface to use and which order of screens makes the most sense and which questions and prompts to give our user and how to treat images. Instead of trying to decide all of those at the same time, which is kind of impossible for our dumb human brains, we are breaking these tasks down into higher level, big picture decisions that can be decided on one at a time and then allows for us to make each decision with a lot more information and with a lot more reasoning behind it as we go along. If we decide early and design late, we'll actually find that even though there's more steps, we will be doing each step a lot faster, and each step will inform the next one in a way that makes it so that we can focus on just the particular details that we need in that moment. So that's what I mean by decide early and design late. So, where do you find UX? All over the place. Apps, websites, products, spaces, basically anywhere someone is doing something. Even things like buildings. The UX of Instruments Office is a really interesting article thinking about how they rearranged or arranged initially all of their spaces to encourage run-ins between different employees, different designers and developers and everyone who could inform each other's work. It encourages a really collaborative space. But that was intentional and that was designed. And even though it's not an app or a website, it's still something that an intention and a goal was put forward, and then different solutions, different ideas were brought out, put together to create a space that is really conducive for that. We also see it in industrial design, product design, UX for Airbnb. So what's interesting about Airbnb is it's a lot of what happens with Airbnb kind of takes place in the real world, but for most people, there's going to be the website, the searching, the filtering. The people who are looking for the places are going to be experiencing one thing. But this needs to be a seamless process from beginning to end. Same thing with Tesla. This is technically an interface that is mostly a digital screen thing, but it also needs to incorporate what it's like to be in a physical car, and that car going down the road, and you having to trust that this space, this car, this thing is not going to kill you. And so user experience in communicating, getting buy-in, and getting understanding from the user is essential in all these spaces. But this is things that can be applied to all sorts of stuff. Anywhere someone is doing something, we want to make sure that we are thinking about what the user needs, what they want, how they're feeling, and that our designs are addressing all of those things well. Now, let's get back to the tools for a little bit. We talked about personas, we talked about user journeys in the last class, and it's really important to know where you're starting from and understand how your users feel and what they need in order to be able to start making the right choices as far as what to work on. But once you get past that stage, there's still a lot of other decisions that need to be made. And let's say you've already got an idea for what you are trying to create. You've got a clear goal in mind for the app that you're designing. There's still going to be a lot of decisions, maybe thousands of decisions, really, if you break it down into every minute decision that you make throughout the entire start to finish. But before you can really start making some of those bigger decisions, you just have to know what you're working with. And so we will use something called content mapping. It's very simple. It's just basically creating a list of all the information you need before designing. Imagine how frustrating it is when you want to design a book or a logo and a client doesn't give you any of the feedback, any of the data, any of the text or imagery that you would need to be able to start doing that. You can't really make any informed decisions. You could start putting together some skeletons, but having actual content and understanding what that content is makes it so much easier to start designing for. So that is what content mapping is. For instance, a weather app like Apple's weather app, we can see right here that location name, weather conditions, temperature, and a couple different formats of forecasting. Typically, you don't work from an app and create a list from that. We're not just listing the things that are going on here. More often than not, the design process would be the reverse of that you think of all the things that you need to include, and then as you design, you find the spaces and the ways to present that content. Let's do another example real quickly. So, if we were to create a content map of this page right here from Airbnb, besides just the graphical UI elements, as the screen says, what are the things that would be necessary for a Airbnb house location rental page? So I'll just go through them. They're already in the slide, so I'll just go through them like that. Obviously, photos for people to be able to view it. Name of the property, property location, host information, property features, price, reviews, CTA, call to action. These are all things that we know need to be on this page for people to make an informed decision, be able to understand whether or not this is the right place for them. There might be other things that could have been included, but these are the things that Airbnb decided, okay, these are the things that we need to include. We just need to make sure we get all of these in here, clearly designed in a way that's easy to read and easy to scan, and we end up with a page that looks like this. Now that last one, a CTA, what is that? A CTA, or call to action, is an image or line of text that prompts your visitors, leads, and customers to take action. If we go back to the screen, we can see that the check availability, that is the call to action here. What we mean by that, whenever we're designing pretty much any interface, we are always going to be wanting to provide our users with a clear next step. And a lot of the times that does have to do with, buy now, sign up here, check out this thing, finish this process. It's quite often the concluding element on a page. But even on a home page, we are going to maybe say, learn more, or view pricing. There's a lot of times where we want to kind of push people to the next step, and call to actions quite often follow the same sort of principles. We want to make sure that they are usually the most visible thing on the screen. It's rare that that is not the case. We want to make sure that they have a verb in there, that they have an action associated with it, and then also that's just really, really obvious what would be happening when we click on that. We want to make sure there's a lot of clarity there. But by putting it so prominently and making the words really clear and concise and actionable, there's no confusion as to what's going on here. And it makes it really easy for people to find and take that next step. Another thing I want to talk a little bit about today. These, again, are other tools that are going to be helpful for figuring out exactly what we want to design when we get to the visual UI design side of things. But sometimes we need to figure out what is going on at a very high level. And user flows are a lot like user journeys. In fact, they even came up in that lecture when we talked about those the other day. But user flows are essentially a set of steps taken by a user to achieve a goal within a digital product. So you could make a user flow for non-digital products, but that's not a user flow. That's a flow chart. But nevertheless, a user flow is pretty specifically about the steps and screens and decisions that are made as a user is trying to achieve a specific goal. Now, a very simple user flow for setting an alarm in the alarm app might look something like this. The different shapes and colors help us differentiate between what we're doing at different stages. We're going to first of all start with opening the clock app. That seems really obvious. We always want to give a really clear starting point and a very clear ending point. And then in between we will show the different decisions and all of the different steps and how they can lead from one to the next. If you have pen and paper, I actually kind of like starting with this at first. Sometimes I think better when I'm using my hands and able to doodle and scratch things out and not have to be so precious about what it looks like visually. There's this really great shorthand for essentially showing a lot of the same information, and it follows this format right here. For every point along that process, we start with two things: what the user sees and then what they do. You separate them with a line so you can kind of see above and below where we are, what we're looking at, what we're visualizing, and then the options or steps that can be taken from that point, and then where all those lead. And we can make those a little bit more complicated. We can make it so that there might be multiple paths that are coming out of a particular screen. So with the login screen, for instance, let's just say, great, they submitted their username and password just fine. Perfect. They go straight to their dashboard. If they got it wrong, then maybe it takes them back to their login screen, but this time with an error note. So it's not exactly the same login screen, but there's a slight note there. Doesn't even have to loop back sometimes. These are just for us to be able to see the paths taken. The forgot password link, for instance, if they had gotten to this point, didn't even submit anything, but just couldn't remember their password, they could be taken to this whole other side path that allows for them to figure out how to reset their password, and then they might just start back over here with their new password with the login screen and continue on, hopefully straight to the dashboard at that point. Now, looking at that same process, but in a more user flow format, this is the format we're often seeing. We can see that we are starting with the login screen, and then depending on what's going on here, the user inputs name and password. If they mess it up, well then they get taken to the invalid password error notification and brought back to the login screen. If they are good, they go straight to the dashboard. Again, if they click the the forgot password button, then they'll go through this prop right here. They will perhaps be taken straight back saying that the email is sent, and they go straight to the login screen, or go through the reset password process right there, and then back to the login screen again. We might include a couple more arrows showing that that process could have been brought full circle, and the app itself could take them back to the login screen at the conclusion of this process, but you get what's going on here. The things that we're seeing here, the different shapes and colors, all indicate things like states, what we see, choices that get made, and then sort of the option or the state that happens depending on what happens. So if their choices lead us to an invalid password, then that is sort of our indication, like this is where we went here, and then we can continue the user flow from there. There's different ways of doing these, by the way. You'll see different templates and formats and suggestions online. As long as you are consistent, generally it works out all right. So let's just do another one. For example, setting a target pace on a running app. The user opens up the running app, great. Hit start run. The GPS, so this is something that the user isn't doing, but because they hit start run, the app starts working, tracks the user, and then gets a input from their pace, and then hit go. So this is a pretty simple process. The app also at this point might be suggesting a pace, and if they go with the suggested one, that might also kind of lead them to the same go point, but might be a more informed choice based on the input that happens at that screen right there. Adding a little bit of depth, for instance, you might just have a quick start button that takes you straight to the GPS and getting going. Or you could maybe continue with the similar process from before. So again, just having choices right here. We might actually have two buttons on the screen that says quick start or new run, and then we can have different outcomes based on the path that goes on here. You can definitely have branching arrows going on from one option, or have multiple options lead back to a similar outcome. These are very easy to do, and it makes it really easy to visualize what is going on and why a user would be choosing one thing or another. User flows are fantastic for being able to, one, make sure that you aren't forgetting anything, that you aren't leading users into a dead end. You pretty much always want users to be led to a place where there's always a next natural step. And then two, it makes it easy to see how different decisions can impact what they're going. These are very, very simple user flows. An actual app, even a fairly straightforward single task-based app, usually has a lot more variation, a lot of options that could affect a lot of other different states later on in the process. So choices made early on could have a really big impact on what happens later. For instance, let's say a user clicks quick start. That might affect what happens during the run. They might have fewer options, or when they finish their run, not be presented with so many details because they are kind of in a quick start mode. But maybe if they go with the more robust new run path, that there's going to be multiple options and settings that could come up throughout the process, through the run, or at the end of the run, that might be more indicative of the deeper choice path that they chose at the very, very beginning of opening the app. I just wanted to show you also what something looks like without the color. The user flows really are best when they're scannable, when it's really easy to see the choices and understand them. Seeing the color, seeing the shapes makes it really easy to follow, understand what you're looking at, and not have to read every single word. Something like this is still workable, but you can see how much harder it is to be able to mentally follow what's going on right here. So it's always a good idea to use color, use shapes, and annotate everything. You should be labeling all of your nodes, but you also might include notes and other details on the outside of that to help clarify different aspects that might be more complicated than you would just see on those nodes. All right, let's create our own user flow. I want, for instance, to check my account balance. I'm going to create a user flow for me to be able to log into my bank's account, mobile app, and check my account and see how much money I have. That might be complicated, might not be, but I've got the normal user flow tools, and I just need to figure out what happens in between opening up the app and figuring out how my account balances look. Oh, not there yet. I clicked it. Okay. Anyway. I have a quick little demo template here to be working from. And so these are some of the more common things that you'll see. These colors are arbitrary. The shapes are somewhat arbitrary. Quite often you'll see pages being rectangles and decision moments being diamonds. But you have some leeway to do these however you want. As long as the pattern is clear when people are looking at it and that you're using enough variation that people can follow along and not have to translate so much in their head, then you're probably doing all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to option click and drag these elements from my little palette right here, and I will start filling in the process for logging into a bank account app. So I know I need to start with open app, and then I will end by maybe view dashboard. So I'm breaking my little prompt that I gave myself earlier into a couple different steps because you might want to, or need to at times, have everything line up really well with your with what all of the different steps are, or you might focus on specific sections of your user flow so that you aren't forgetting individual details in there. So recreating kind of that login app thing here in a FigJam. This is FigJam, by the way. So if you want to practice this before we get to class on Tuesday next week, by all means, open up FigJam, create some shapes and try this out. But FigJam is built with user experience design in mind. And so it actually has some of the stuff built right in a really cool, really easy to use way. It's a pretty recent thing that Figma added. Anyway, let's go ahead and see what happens here. So open app, we will very first of all be brought to the page where, oops, let me option drag that, where we will be seeing the login page. From there, we will, maybe we can say we've given a decision of the login stuff. So correct login, just like we saw in our demo earlier. So, and if so, we can say a few choices here. Sure, yes, no, or forgot password. I'm just going to do a couple just to keep this a little quicker. So maybe yes, no. And sometimes if we're showing a choice that is going to be very clearly negative, we could perhaps shift that to a different color so we can visualize very easily that, okay, this is the affirmative, this is the negative. And then we will go from there. So if it's yes, perfect. We will be able to go straight to the dashboard. And I'm going to click the arrow connector button down here. And that button allows for us, as we hover over elements, you can see we get these 4 little dots on each item. We can then connect to wherever we need to go with that. And I'm going to go ahead and add some more of these while I'm right here. So I'm going to connect the opening app to the login page, connect the login page to that. This will bring us both of these prompts right here. And then no, what happens when a user is not able to log in correctly? They could be taken to the forgot password page. We could just have it return with a message saying, show error, and they go back to the login page. Oops, this was supposed to go to there. And we can simplify that process quite a bit. If we wanted to include a forgot password page, we could say that, if they wanted to, actually they probably should have a click password. Oops, let me bring this back. I didn't mean to steal that, but we could provide another pathway there. But let me just say that this is probably good enough for now. One cool thing about FigJam is as you move things around, the arrows move with them. So we could just bring this back over here, and we can see that this is the very simplified version of what it looks like to log into our bank account app. Now, our main goal was really to check our account balances. So let's maybe start from the beginning, but we can maybe skip a few steps because we've already designed our login process. So I'm going to start with open the app again. This time, instead of having us go through all of this and include all those details, I'm going to use this input node right here. And an input node essentially means the user does something here. Sometimes it's shorthand for a longer process that you might explore in another user flow. Sometimes it's really obvious steps like user fills in form or user uploads an image. Like we don't have to say every single thing that they click on, but we might also want to boil down some more complex process into a thing that just allows for us to keep our user flow clean so we can really visualize and understand exactly what's going on right here. So we might, at this point, start connecting some of these. Once they've logged in, then we can perhaps show the dashboard. And from the dashboard, there might be a number of options. So it might be that they have the ability to send money, transfer something between one account and another. We could include some of these things right here because that's quite often what they will be seeing right here. And that's good. That might be, we might put like a nav in here and just say all of the different options they have. But we also could just say that we are having them choose account, and from there they will click account number one. Maybe I'll make this just a little bit bigger to. There we go. Fit that in there, and then they will be brought to their account summary, which has their balance. Connect all these dots. Oops. Because I didn't line that up very well. None of these are lined up well. All those wonky arrows. Nevertheless, the user flow is still pretty clean and makes a lot of sense. There's other options I could be putting in here. Maybe this particular goal is maybe a little bit straightforward, but nevertheless, this is what a user flow looks like. And so this is something that I'm going to have all of you do a couple times for homework. Going back to the presentation, we'll end on that right now. So, with regards to project 1A, I want you to figure out the one task that you want to add. Keep in mind that this is homework for next class. So if you don't want to settle yet, or if you still want to talk about it, in fact, that's part of what we're going to be spending time on in class next session. Just make sure that you're figuring it out by the following class session. Next, I want you to screenshot all of the app screens involved in your task in your app. All the current app screens. These are the ones that exist in the app that you're choosing. These are not things that you're designing. I want you to essentially get a survey of all of the different screens that are going to be involved in your tasks so that you'll have them available to look at and to be able to start dissecting and analyzing. And then I want you to create a content map for your task. What are all of the different pieces of information that you'll need either from your user or that you'll just need to create on your own or from the database that the app pulls from in order for that app task to be doable and designable. Next, I also want you to create a user flow for an existing process in your app from start to finish. And then I want you to create another user flow for your task. So this first one is an existing process that is not your task, is an existing task that is something that is already there. So for instance, if you are doing PayPal, that it is the process of sending money to a friend. If you know what your task is, then the second user flow you're going to make is going to be the steps from start to finish of how to accomplish the task that you want to add. Does that make sense? Well, I'm asking, but you can't answer. I hope it makes sense. If you have any questions, bring them with you to class, and I'll see you then.